Hello everyone, I am Little Girl Minion Michelle and I will be returning to do this Animation Friday and hopefully it turns out well. But basically for this video I wanted to discuss in particular my favorite TV show villains. I believe a previous Minion discussed the favorite non-Disney villains and those are villains that are primarily through film. And this is going to be through television. So hopefully these villains are some that you are maybe familiar with. I'm primarily going off of villains that I am familiar with and have watched extensively. There are probably some famous villains out there that I'm not primarily aware with because I've never watched the television show that was associated with them, so they're not therefore included on this list. But I hope the ones that I bring up are ones that people are fairly familiar with and find to be all the more enjoyable to observe as far as their evil plans and personalities are concerned. So starting right out of the gate, Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. This guy in particular is very famous. Not only is he the owner of the Springfield nuclear power plant, but his evil doings range and are fairly wide as far as their impact throughout the town. And in doing so, watching his various schemes and his whole evil planning, I think really is what makes the whole show of The Simpsons rather engaging and enjoyable to watch. Ranging from animal cruelty to greed, he is just all over the place as far as what he is capable of trying to do, or at least attempts to do. And I think what makes this villain actually fairly entertaining is the fact that his demeanor is very, cruel. It presents this kind of intimidating yet kind of cruel persona, but at the same time, he does it in a way that makes it all the more enjoyable and at the same time comedic. And he really does present himself in a way that showcases that he is really the somewhat ultimate and primary villain, I think, throughout The Simpsons. Especially when he's noted for saying, excellent and whatnot. He just has this presence that really is well showcased through the animation as well as through his voice and his just whole persona that he gives off as that character. So he is definitely, I think, worthy of paying attention to as far as a television animated villain is concerned. And a lot of people, I think, in particular, remember this villain just for the sheer amount of episodes that he's in and where he sort of leaves an impact. But I think that's ultimately all I can say about Mr. Burns. But moving on to another villain that I'm fairly familiar with, and that's Azula from The Last Airbender. And she is basically the princess of the Fire Nation, which is basically the nation that is sort of the enemy to all of the other nations that are surrounding the area, like the wind and the earth nation and whatnot, all of these other, I guess you could call them tribes. I'm not exactly sure how it's really exactly termed within the Last Airbender show, or Avatar: The Last Airbender show. But she's someone that I think a lot of people, in particular who are familiar with the show, really remember because she is rather menacing in how sadistic, manipulative, and power hungry she is. Like, she will go to the extended length to ultimately get what she wants. And you sort of get to a little bit of a backstory. Like, you really understand sort of why she is the way she is, and how she is primarily sort of, I guess you could say, haunted sort of by the past that she's experienced, and in doing so, that's what makes her the way that she is, primarily within the present, at least within the context of the show. And she really tries to do the double crossing pretty well, and she really tries to give off this very, almost very, almost want to say it's a fairly, psychotically almost bitchy presence, as far as the way she is presented visually, as well as through her voice as well. And you really do feel like that she is supposed to be that ultra powerful force that can knock the protagonists down whenever they try to get a leg up on her or anyone that she believes to be her allies. In particular, her dad, who is not really the most friendliest to her, if you sort of read more into her backstory, but she is blindly sort of devoted to his cause, and you really see how that is what primarily drives her into becoming a villain, is this whole desire to sort of appease her dad and, ultimately get what she wants. And you kind of see too a little bit of the spoiled nature that she has, obviously being a princess sometimes that makes sense, at least within the context of this show. But she's one that's, I think, very, very interesting to watch, and she is, I think, oftentimes fairly memorable when she is present throughout the show. So, well done villain, and one that I, in particular, remember at least recently when it comes to a lot of these animated television shows that have come and gone over the years. Third villain that I wanted to mention is rather an old one and almost kind of iconic, but rather different than the previous two villains that I've mentioned, and that's Elmer Fudd from Looney Tunes. What I find very enjoyable about this villain is a lot of the times, you associate a villain for how well they succeed, how well they hash their plan, how much they intimidate the heroes. But with Elmer Fudd, it's entertaining to watch him fail every single time. And he seems to have this very interesting possession of wanting to get a rabbit. Like, that's his ultimate goal in life, is to just get a rabbit so he can eat it. That's his primary objective, and you really do see how devoted he is to that objective, because it's pretty much played out in the same exact way throughout a lot of the episodes. But I think what makes him rather entertaining is the fact that he kind of appears at times, just kind of this innocent, just little man just trying to get what he wants, but constantly being manipulated into not being able to really accomplish his goals. And I think it really works within the context of Looney Tunes, and it makes it all the more enjoyable to watch. And it's nice to see him get tricked, and it's nice to see how he tries to hitch a plan and ends up failing. And I think that's what really brings out the comedy of Looney Tunes, because without Elmer Fudd, the comedy is almost not there, because you don't have a villain to not only try to intimidate, but also try to go against the protagonists. And it's nice to see him sort of interacting too when, Daffy Duck is trying to make it so that he's not an ultimate victim of Elmer Fudd, and you sort of see him fail as well. So it seems like the Looney Tunes in particular likes to laugh at the concept of failure, of trying to hatch something brilliant, but then it comes off as stupid. And it really is what makes the show stand out, and I think a lot of it has to do with the villainy that surrounds Elmer Fudd's character. And I like how he has sort of this sort of innocent charm to him, but at the same time he has this very menacing kind of crazy obsession with trying to get a rabbit. So it, I think, ultimately works, at least for the time in which these kinds of cartoons are coming about, and makes it all the more enjoyable to watch. Now, the fourth one I'm going to briefly mention is Pete from Mickey Mouse. The interesting thing about Pete is that he's appeared in a variety of different cartoon television shows and cartoon shorts. He actually started off in the Alice cartoons before he appeared in Mickey Mouse, actually. And he's become known as probably one of the most early villains that Disney ever really kind of put out there to the forefront. And he's sort of maintained kind of this sort of legacy, and people sort of remember him in particular. But what really makes this character actually great, and why I enjoy Pete rather, or at least I enjoy him to a greater extent than some other cartoon animated villains that I've seen, is there's a lot of variation with this character. Like, he starts out fairly different than in certain parts where you see his character being executed within various animated TV sort of like shorts, and then you see how he evolves once television becomes a primary form for animation to be utilized. But the best description that I could at least come up with as far as Pete's character is concerned is he's primarily a bully. He is designed to be kind of that Biff-like character who tries to do whatever he can to kind of get what he wants, or basically is up to no good only for the sake of trying to, intimidate or, destroy the heroes in some way, shape, or form, or maybe even humiliate them. So his schemes are so varied, from being a con artist to, creating some elaborate scheme to intimidate the heroes, and not only just Mickey Mouse, but also Donald and Goofy as well. So he's been out there and doing a lot of evil-like things throughout the years, and although he's maybe not the most developed as far as a villain is concerned, and we're not really looking into his psyche or whatnot, but what we do see, at least primarily, I think, with Pete, is just how much more entertainment he gives off to any particular animated short he's in, and how oftentimes he appears to be the center villain and tries to come up with something, and this is usually where the comedy ends up coming in, similar to Elmer Fudd, like when he doesn't succeed, or when it's almost looking like he's about to succeed, but then maybe something happens and he's incapable of following through. So it's one of those villains that is not only intimidating as far as how he looks, since he's supposed to be oftentimes represented as a very gigantic figure, but also in the way he thinks sometimes, as far as his intellect and such. So brawn and brains are in this character too. So at least throughout the years in the various versions that he's been present. But yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say about Pete. He's fun and entertaining, to say the least. But last and certainly not least, Pluto from Popeye. Now, Pluto is fairly similar into how he is presented as to how Pete is basically represented in the form of this very uh, buff and big figure. But at the same time, Pluto is interesting because he's got a more specific goal, unlike Pete, who's just kind of there to just cause some kind of destruction. Pluto is largely motivated by wanting olive oil, Popeye's girlfriend. And usually you see the various things to which he tries to ultimately get olive oil, and how he is foiled by Popeye every single time, at least for the most part. And the interesting thing too is they've actually mentioned in some of the particular cartoon shorts that Pluto was actually friends with Popeye for some time, but then eventually once olive oil came into the picture, it pretty much destroyed the relationship. And then you see how at times maybe there'll be close points to where they can maybe ultimately rekindle the relationship, but Pluto still tries to ultimately be the villain, and basically kind of instead of letting go and trying to find another olive oil somewhere, he just keeps on going with the same plan. But I think, or at least end goal. But I think really the dynamic that he and Popeye have is rather interesting, and it is entertaining to watch. And I think it makes Popeye all more that entertaining is having this sort of bully Pluto there to kind of be the alternate for Olive Oil's affections. And the funny thing is too is sometimes Olive Oil is actually on board with Pluto, like sort of being, I guess, her boyfriend, and another time she's not. So it's kind of I guess you could call it a catch-22, where you just kind of go, oh, okay. So at times it just plays out in a variety of different ways as far as onto which how they execute the whole three-character dynamic between Olive Oil, Popeye, and Pluto. But at the end of the day, Pluto is one of those characters. It's almost like, the Popeye show wouldn't be the same without him, and Popeye probably wouldn't be the same without him, because whenever there's Pluto, there's always spinach to basically get Pluto out of the way. So, yeah. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say about all of these villains. Those were all of the villains that I wanted to mention, but I'm sure there are definitely others that are also fairly famous and well known and people have recognized and praised over the years. But as far as television is concerned, I'm not familiar with a whole lot, and although I've been exposed recently to some, I can't really necessarily comment too much on them since I haven't really watched the shows extensively. But yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say for this particular video. Hopefully I can come by next year, but thank you all so much for watching. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, be more than happy to answer them. But I wish the next minion luck, and goodbye.